from the blackest corners of your mind, they call, pulling you deep into shadow, twisting your senses, keeping you from sleep. It's time to face your darkest fears. This is Tales to Terrify. Good evening, children of the night, and welcome. It's officially fall here in the Northern Hemisphere. You can practically feel that horrifying miasma swirling on the air, enveloping you in the haunted spirit of the season. Fortunately for you, you've still got a bit of time to release those inner demons you've been holding in all summer onto the page and into our Halloween flash fiction contest. At the command of the Elder Gods, we'll be keeping the portal open until midnight on September 30th. That means you've got just a few more days left before the gates shutter closed forever. So, if you've still got a haunting Halloween legend that you haven't deposited into our care, make haste to talestoterrify.com/flash contest and cast it into our capable claws. And make sure to stay tuned in a few weeks for our special Halloween episode as we unearth the winners. As another treat to get you in the Halloween spirit, this weekend we've got the latest installment of our Patreon exclusive author interview series, hosted by our very own Seth Williams. This month, Seth delves into the mind and methods of regular contributing author J.V. Gachs. Head to patreon.com/talestoterrify where you can sign up and take a listen. For tonight, though, we have two tales for you. First, we meet a woman with one hell of a mess to clean in her bathroom. Then we uncover the mysterious identity of the terrifying entity haunting a country home. Our first story for the evening comes from R.S. Nelson. R.S. Nelson is a Latina writer who lives and finds inspiration in Southern California. Her flash fiction has been published in Flash Fiction Magazine, Flash Phantoms, Sci-Fi Sat, Every Writer, Spill Words, Everyday Fiction, and elsewhere. Her short stories will be published in 3 different anthologies this year, and she's currently hard at work writing creative non-fiction. She devotes her spare time to spoiling her 8-year-old golden doodle and her beautiful 1-year-old cat. Children of the night, join me for R.S. Nelson's Supplies Needed to Clean the Bloodbath in My Bathroom, a Tales to Terrify original.
I stare at the bloodstains on the bathtub, the bathroom walls, and the splatters on the windows. I take out my notebook and write my shopping list. Ammonia, to remove the bloodstains from the once white bathtub and the bathroom tiles. Plus, it will help me erase the handprints on the walls and wipe out the brain and tissue remains from the glass and jewelry. Even though I will throw away what's left of the watches, rings, and earrings anyway. Bleach, for disinfecting and whitening the tiles in the tub after I'm done cleaning them, because the idea of taking a bath in there grosses me out. Brush, to scrub the bathtub and the walls. Luckily, the blood hasn't completely dried out, so I will be able to remove it. I wonder at what time the store opens. Gloves, because there's no way I'm having blood on my hands again. Mask, because the metallic smell makes me gag, and I'm going to throw up before I have even had a chance to eat breakfast. Plastic bag. I will need 1 or 2 large ones, so I can place the towels and jewelry in them before I take them out at nighttime to dump them behind the Chinese restaurant around the corner. Demon repellent. I don't think the store will have this, so I might grab a bat or a knife instead, just to make me believe I'm safe. If I feed the demons, they will be fine, but you never know when one of them might want a snack in between meals. Medication. I might as well stop at the pharmacy to get it, so the doctor will stop asking me if I have taken it, insisting that the demons are only in my head.
That was R.S. Nelson's Supplies Needed to Clean the Bloodbath in My Bathroom, as read by Mel Rose. Mel has a knack for bringing scripts to life in a way that feels like chatting with an old friend, the comforting, quirky neighbor next door who always has a story to share. Thank you, Mel. Our second tale tonight is a classic, which comes to us from an author known only as Q.E.D. No biography for this enigmatic author seems to exist. So, listen with me, children of the night, to Q.E.D.'s A Fight with a Ghost, first published in the anthology 25 Ghost Stories, 1904.
"No, I never believed much in ghosts," said the doctor, "but I was always rather afraid of them." "Have you ever seen one?" asked one of the other men. The doctor took his cigar out of his mouth and contemplated the ash for a moment or two before replying. "I have had some rather startling experiences," he said, after a pause, during which the rest of us exchanged glances, for the doctor has seen many things, and is not averse to talking about them in congenial company. "Would you care about hearing one of them? It gives me the cold shivers now to speak of it." We nodded, and the doctor, taking a sip as an antidote to the shivers, began. "You remember George Carson, who played for the varsity some years ago? Big chap with a light moustache. Well, I saw a good deal of him before he married, while he was reading for the bar in town. It was just after he became engaged to Miss Stoner, who is now Mrs. Carson, that he asked me to go down to a place which his people had taken in the country. Miss Stoner was to be there, and he wanted me to meet her. I could not go down for Christmas Day, as I'd promised to be with my people. But as I'd been working a bit too hard and wanted a few days' rest, I decided to run down for a few days about the New Year. Woodcote was a pleasant enough place to look at. There were 2 packs of hounds within easy distance, and it was not far enough from a station to cut you off completely from the morning papers. The Carsons had been lucky, I thought, in coming across such a good house at such a moderate figure. For, as George told me, the owner had been obliged to go abroad for his health, and was anxious not to leave the place empty all the winter. It was an old house, with big gables and preposterous corners all over the place, and you couldn't walk 10 paces along any of the passages without tumbling up or down stairs. But it had been patched up from time to time, and, among other improvements, a big billiard room had been built out at the back. A country house in the winter, without a billiard room, when the frost stops hunting, is just, well, not even a gilded prison. The party was a small one. Besides George and his father and mother, there were only a couple of Mrs. Carson, who, being somewhere in the early teens, didn't count, and Miss Stoner, of course, who counted a good deal, and lastly myself. Miss Stoner ought to have been happy, for George Carson, besides being an excellent fellow all round, was by no means a bad match, being an only son with considerable expectations. But somehow or other she did not strike me as looking either very well or very happy. She gave me the impression of having something on her mind which made her alternately nervous and listless. George, I fancied, noticed it, and was puzzled by it, for I caught him several times watching her with an anxious and inquiring look. But as I was not there as a doctor, of course it was no business of mine, though I discovered the reason before I left Woodcote. The second night after my arrival, we had been playing, I remember, a family pool. The rest had gone upstairs to bed. George and I adjourned to a sort of study, which he'd arranged upstairs, for a final smoke and a chat before turning in. The study was next to his bedroom, and parted off from it by curtains. As we were settling down, I missed my pipe and remembered that I'd laid it down in the billiard room. On principle, I never smoke another man's pipe, so I lit a candle, the house being in darkness, and started away in search of my own. The house looked awfully weird by the flickering light of a solitary candle, and the stairs creaked in a particularly gruesome way behind me, just for all the world as though someone were following at my heels. I found my pipe where I had expected, in the billiard room, and came back in perhaps a little more hurry than was absolutely necessary, which perhaps explains why I stumbled in the uncertain light over a couple of unforeseen stairs and dropped my candle. Of course it went out, but after a little groping I found it. Having no matches with me, I was obliged to feel my way along the banisters, for it was so dark that I could not see my hand in front of me, and as I slowly advanced, sliding my hand along the broad balustrade at my side, it suddenly slid over something cold and clammy, which was not balustrade at all. For, stopping dead, and closing my fingers round it for an instant, I felt that I was holding another hand, a skinny, bony hand, which writhed itself slowly from my grasp. And though I could hear nothing and see nothing, I was yet conscious that something was brushing past me and going up the stairs. "Hi, what's that? Who are you?" I called. There was no answer. I admit that I was in a regular funk. I must have shown it in my face. "What's the matter?" asked George, as I blundered into his study. "Oh, nothing," I answered. "Dropped my candle and lost the way." "But who were you talking to?" "I was only swearing at the candle," I replied. "Oh, I thought perhaps you'd seen somebody," replied George. Somehow I did not like to tell him the truth, for fear he would laugh at my nervousness, but I determined to keep an eye on my liver and take a couple of weeks' complete rest. That night, I woke up several times with the feeling of that confounded hand under my own, a clammy hand which writhed as my fingers closed upon it. The next morning after breakfast I was in the billiard room practising strokes, while Carson was over at the stables. Presently the door opened and Miss Stoner looked in. "Come in," I said. "George will be back from the stables in a few minutes. Meanwhile we can have 50 up." "I wanted to speak to you," she said. She was looking very tired and ill, and I began to think that I should not have an uninterrupted holiday after all. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked, having closed the door and come up to the table where she stood leaning with both her hands upon it. "No," I replied, missing an easy carom as I remembered my experience last night. "But I believe in fancy." "And supposing that a person fancied he saw things, is there any remedy?" "What do you mean, Miss Stoner?" I replied, looking at her in some surprise. "Do you mean that you fancy—" I stopped, for Miss Stoner turned away, sat down on one of the easy chairs by the wall, and burst into tears. "Oh, please help me," she sobbed. "I believe I am going mad." I laid down my cue and went over to her. "Look here, Miss Stoner," I said, taking her hand, which was hot and feverish. "I am a doctor and a friend of George. Now tell me all about it, and I'll do my best to set it right." She was in a more or less hysterical condition, and her words were freely punctuated by sobs. But gradually I managed to elicit from her that nearly every night since she came to Woodcote she had been awakened in some mysterious way, and had seen a horrible face looking at her from over the top of a screen which stood by the door of her bedroom. As soon as she moved, the face disappeared, which convinced her that the apparition existed only in her imagination. This seemed to distress her even more than if she believed it to be a genuine ghost, for she thought her brain was giving way. I told her she was only suffering from a very common symptom of nervous disorder, as indeed it was, and promised to send a groom into the village to get a prescription made up for her. And having made me promise to breathe no word to anyone on the subject, more especially to George, she went away relieved. Nevertheless, I was not quite certain that I had made a correct diagnosis of the case. You see, I'd been rather upset myself not many hours before. George was longer than I expected at the stable, and I was just going to find him when at the door I met Mrs. Carson. "Can you spare me one moment?" she said, as I held open the door for her. "I wanted to find you alone." "Well, certainly, Mrs. Carson, with pleasure. An hour, if you wish," I replied. "Oh, it is so convenient, you know, to have a doctor in the house," she said, with a nervous laugh. "Now, I want you to prescribe me a sleeping draught. My nerves are rather out of order, and I don't sleep as I should." "Ah," I said. "Do you see faces and such like things when you wake?" "How do you know?" she asked quickly. "Oh, I inferred from the other symptoms. We doctors have to observe all kinds of little things." "Well, of course, I know it is only fancy, but it's just as bad as if it were real. I assure you it is making me quite ill, and I didn't like to mention it to Mr. Carson or to George. They would think I was losing my head." We all sat up rather late that night. There seemed to be a general disinclination to go to bed. We stayed all together in the billiard room until nearly midnight, and then loitered about in the hall, talking in an aimless sort of fashion. But at last Mrs. Carson said good night, with a confidential nod to me, and Miss Stoner murmured, "So many thanks. I've got it." And they both went upstairs. George and I parted in the corridor above. Our rooms were opposite each other. I did not begin undressing at once, but sat down and tried to piece together some theory to account for the uncanniness of things. But the more I thought, the more perplexing it became. There was no doubt whatever that I'd put my hand on something extremely alive and extremely unpleasant the night before. The bare recollection of it made me shudder. What living thing could possibly be creeping about the house in the dark? It was a man's hand. Of that I was certain from the size of it. George Carson was out of the question, for he was in the room all the time. Nor was it likely that Mr. Carson Sr. would steal about in his own house in his socks and refuse to answer when spoken to. The only other man in the house was an eminently respectable-looking butler, and his hand, as I'd noted particularly when he poured out my wine at dinner, was plump and soft, whereas the mysterious hand on the balustrade was thin and bony. Then I went to the door, intending to lock it. Just as my hand was upon the key, I heard a soft step in the corridor outside, accompanied by a sound which was something between a sigh and a groan. Very faint, but quite unmistakable, and, under the circumstances, discomposing. It might, of course, be George. Anyhow, I decided to look and see. I turned the handle gently and opened the door. There was nothing to be seen in the corridor, but on the opposite side I could see a door open and George's head peeping round the corner. "Hello," he said. "Hello," I replied. "Was that you walking up the passage?" he asked. "No," I answered. "I thought it might be you." "Then who the devil was it?" he said. "I swear I heard someone." There was silence for a few moments. I was wondering whether I had better tell him of the fright I had already had, when he spoke again. "I say, just come here for a bit, old fellow. I want to speak to you." I stepped across the passage and we went together into the little study which adjoined his bedroom. "Look here," he said, poking up the fire which was burning low. "Doesn't it strike you that there's something very odd about this house?" "You mean?" "Well, I wouldn't say anything about it to the master or Miss Stoner, for fear of frightening them. All the same, scarcely a night passes but I hear curious footsteps on the stairs. You've heard them yourself, haven't you?" "Well, now you mention it," I said, "I confess I have. And what is more," he continued, "I was sitting here 2 nights ago, half asleep, and it seems ridiculous, I know, but it's a fact. I suddenly saw a horrible face glaring at me between those curtains behind you. It was gone in a moment, but I saw it as plainly as I see you." I moved my seat unsteadily. "Did you look in your bedroom or in the passage?" I asked. "Yes, at once," he replied. "There was nothing to be seen, but twice again that night I heard footsteps passing. Good God!" "What is it?" I asked breathlessly. "I saw it again, the same face, between the curtains." I tore the hangings aside and rushed into the next room. It was empty, and the lamp was burning upon a side table, and the door was open just as George had left it. In the passage outside, all was quiet. I came back into the study and found George running his fingers through his hair in perplexity. "There is clearly one person too many in the house," I said. "I think we ought to draw the place and find out who it is." "All right," said he, picking up the poker from the fireplace. "If it's anything made of flesh and blood, this will be useful, and if not—" He stopped short, for at that instant the most awful shriek of horror rang through the house. A shriek of wild, uncontrollable terror, such as I had never heard before and I never hoped to hear again. One moment we stood staring at each other, dumbfounded. The next, George Carson had dashed out of the room and down the corridor to the stairs. I followed close behind him, for we both knew that none but a woman in mortal fear would shriek like that, and that woman was Miss Stoner. Down the stairs we tumbled pell-mell in the darkness. But before I reached the landing below where Miss Stoner's room was, I felt, as I had felt the evening before, something brush swiftly past me. As I ran, I turned and caught at it in the dark, but my hand gripped only empty air. I was just about to turn back and follow it when a cry from George arrested me, and looking down, I saw him standing over the prostrate form of Miss Stoner. The door of her room was open, and by the moonlight which streamed into the room, I could see her lying in her white nightdress across the threshold. What followed in the next few minutes I can scarcely recall with accuracy. The whole house was aroused by the poor girl's awful shriek. She was quite unconscious when we came upon her, but she revived more or less as soon as Mrs. Carson came, and one of the terrified servants had lifted her into bed again. Nothing intelligible could be gathered from her. However, as to the cause of her fright, she only repeated hysterically, again and again, "Oh, the face! The face!" When I saw that I could do her no further good for the present, I took George by the arm and led him out of the room. "Look here, George," I said. "We must find out the reason of this at once. I am certain I felt something go by me as I came downstairs. Now, does that staircase lead anywhere but to our rooms?" George considered for a moment. "Yes," he replied. "There is a door at the end of the passage which leads up to a sort of lumber room." "Then we'll explore it," I said. For my part, I can't go to sleep until I've got to the bottom of this. Get the man to bring a lantern along." The butler looked as though he didn't half like the enterprise, and to tell the truth, no more did I. It was the uncanniest job I ever undertook. However, we started, the three of us. First of all, we searched the rooms on the floor above, where George and I slept. Everything was just as we had left it. Then I pushed open the door at the end of the corridor. A crazy-looking staircase led up into the darkness. We went cautiously up, I first with a candle, then George, and last of all the butler with a lantern. At the top, we stepped into a big, rather low room with beams across the ceiling and a rough, uneven floor. Our lights threw strange shadows into the corners, and more than once I started at what looked like a crouching human figure. We searched every corner. There was nothing to be seen but a few old boxes, a roll or two of matting, and some broken chairs. But in the far corner, George pointed out to me a rickety ladder which ended up at a closed trapdoor. Just then, I distinctly heard the curious, half-groaning, half-sighing sound, which I had already puzzled about in the corridor below. We stood still and looked at one another. We all heard the sound. "Whatever it is, it's up there," I said. "The question is, who's going up?" George put his candle down upon the floor and stepped upon the ladder. It cracked beneath his weight. He stopped. "Come down, it won't bear you," I said. "I shall have to go." I don't know that I was ever in such a queer funk as while I slowly mounted that ladder and pushed open the trapdoor. I had formed no clear idea of what I expected to find there. Certainly, I was not prepared for what happened. For no sooner was the trapdoor fully open than there literally fell upon me from the darkness above a thing in human shape, which kicked and spat and tore at me as I stood clinging to the ladder. It lasted but a moment or so, but in that moment I lived a lifetime of terror. The ladder swayed and cracked beneath me, and I fell to the floor with the thing gripping my throat like a vice. The next instant, George had stunned it with a blow from the poker and dragged it off me. It lay upon its back on the floor, a ragged, hideous and loathsome shape. And the mystery was solved. "But you haven't told us what it really was," said one of the listeners. The doctor smiled. "It was the owner of the house," he replied. "He had not gone abroad. He had gone to a private lunatic asylum with homicidal mania upon him. About a fortnight before this, he had managed to escape, and having made his way to his former home, had concealed himself with a cunning often shown by lunatics in the loft. I suppose he had found enough to eat in his nightly rambles about the house. The only wonder is that he didn't kill someone before he was caught."
That was QED's A Fight with a Ghost, as read by Jed Vesper. Jed Vesper is a horror writer and narrator with a taste for the macabre and strange. His home county of Yorkshire, UK, is steeped in atmosphere and inspiration for the ghoulish and ghostly, so he fits right in. Jed has narrated for The Daily Ghost, LibriVox, and, of course, Tales to Terrify. His debut anthologies, Tales of Dread and Dismay, Volumes 1 and 2, are available in ebook format from Amazon worldwide. Jed is usually most active around the witching hour. That's when the company is best. You can find him haunting Twitter at Jed Vesper. Thank you, Jed. Well, children of the night, the hour is late and we've run out of tales to tell. for now. Tales to Terrify is made possible by the tremendous generosity of our supporters on Patreon and PayPal. Incredible fans like Lestle Baxter, Amanda Carrillo, Amanda Gottfried, and Orion D. Hegre, whose generous support keeps these lights on and flickering ominously. If you're not a supporter, head over to patreon.com/Tales to Terrify. You'll find all kinds of perks, like ad-free episodes, bonus content, and one-of-a-kind collectibles. Every dollar goes back into this show, and we appreciate your support so much. Want another way to support the show that doesn't cost you a cent? Head over to Podchaser, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts and drop us a 5-star review. You'll not only put an unnaturally wide smile on our faces, but help new listeners discover our terrifying tales too. You can show your love of the show out in the world with some Tales to Terrify merch. TalesToTerrify.com/merch will take you to our TeePublic store, where we've got a great collection of creepy custom and curated designs. Tales to Terrify is produced by Seth Williams, Meredith Morgenstern, Andrew Gibson, Crystal Hammond, Spencer Disparty, and myself, Drew Sebastini, with original theme by Nebulous Entertainment. Tales to Terrify is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Join us again next week as we risk our sanity for a taste of salvation with more Tales to Terrify.